And so what I want to share with you today is just some ideas that I've been working on, including some data, but more just some new ideas that I want to present to you today. Let me just provide a little bit of context for my presentation today. Just last Monday, Merriam-Webster announced that gaslighting was their word of the year. For those of you who are not familiar with this term, it refers to chronic deception and manipulation that leads to the target to doubt their view of reality, perceptions, and judgments. The reason I put this as context is because it shows that this is a term that's extremely important to people today. People are talking about it a lot across social media and other domains. And there's a real concern about the effects of chronic deception on civic society and our interpersonal interactions and ourselves. And so this is just as a way to kind of lead you guys into this presentation and the idea that I'm talking about the effects of deception, regardless of whether we're suspicious or whether we're uncovering deceptions or detecting them. So the key question that I really have is, how can we model the effects of deception at the individual and interpersonal and even societal level? It's a big question. I'm not going to answer it fully today, but I'll give you some starting points. So I called it beyond trust and reputation because, if we as deception researchers, we're asked, or what are the effects of deception, we might kind of focus on the risks, including the harm to the target and the harm to the perpetrator. The harm to the target, again, is this idea that there is a sense of betrayal or hurt, that understanding that they've been deceived, and they might experience losses if the deception was kind of a self-serving kind by the liar. When it comes to harm to the actor or the perpetrator, they risk some reputational and trust decrements if their deception is uncovered. And that means they have this decreased ability to attract partners in any kind of collaborative enterprise, whether that be work or mating or other things. And of course, the other thing that they face is punishment. So this is kind of where we start. These are the effects of deception, right? But the important thing is that all of these effects are contingent on the uncovering of the deception, or at least the vast majority of them. And so what we really don't know is what the effects of deception are when detection is kind of taken out of the equation, right? When it's just happening in society or happening in interactions. And there is no perhaps sense of suspicion, and there is no ultimate detection that leads to all these outcomes. So I hope that kind of makes sense of where I'm starting with this. And so over the past year, I've just kind of been looking at this question because I find it very fascinating. And so let's start with some individual effects of deception. Let's look at the liar. So how does deception affect the liar? Well, many of us study deception cues, so we understand that lying is stressful in some ways to the sender, whether they experience cognitive load, as we've just been talking about now, or whether they experience some kind of emotional load due to fear of being detected. So it's stressful to the person lying. But then if we kind of really pull out into kind of long-term effects, it's kind of interesting to look at authenticity research, which shows that people who kind of feel inauthentic, right? So they're engaged in kind of this chronic mismatch between their values and beliefs and how they show up in interactions. It tends to lead to lower subjective well-being, like lower self-esteem, lower meaningfulness. And then we can also kind of take some hints from the emotion research, which looks at how it affects senders when they're trying to hide the emotions that they're feeling. And this is coming out of the emotion regulation research, and we find cardiovascular markers, negative cardiovascular markers, when you're trying to suppress an emotion, so not show an emotion. So this is relatively non-controversial. I think we can kind of agree that lying is stressful for senders. What are the effects on receivers? And remember, we're asking about receivers irrespective of whether they're trying to spot the detection or whether they're suspicious or they've uncovered the deception. Just being exposed to it. What are the effects? And here we will know pretty much nothing. We know nothing. We know some things. And so, an interesting study that came out of the team, Leanne Timbrink and Lee and Connie, they've been looking at unconscious lie detection, but the clue to effects on receivers lies in this kind of research. So for example, in this 2019 study, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, they did find physiological reactions on receivers when they were looking at high stakes lies. Again, they weren't judging the lies necessarily, it was just viewing them. And so we saw things like vasoconstriction and just kind of other stressful effects just from being exposed to deception. And then aside from that, I really have not been able to find any research that's kind of examined this problem. So for example, I mentioned gaslighting at the beginning of the presentation. We know that gaslighting can result in significant mental health problems like depression and anxiety. We don't really have a scientific explanatory model for how this happens. So in this situation, somebody is chronically being deceived and they develop mental health problems. But we're kind of unable to really track that process, i.e. the effect of deception on the individual. So where I kind of want to kind of share some new ideas with you and where this might be kind of relevant to this issue is the active inference account of cognition and affect. This is also sometimes, this has become the dominant model in neuroscience and cognition research and philosophy, looking at how the brain sort of interprets reality. And it's also sometimes called the predictive processing model, and I've also heard it referred to as the Bayesian brain. So the idea is that we actively predict and construct our experience of others in the world. So we're not just passive recipients of our reality, we're constantly predicting it. And we're information seekers and gluttons. We want information so that we're trying to minimize the amount of error that we experience when we see how our predictions matched up to reality. This model also has accounts for negative mood, and that's a result of increasing error rates. So the idea is you have a working model of the world, but what you're finding is that the reality is mismatching and the error rates are increasing. And so we experience a negative mood. Now you might be asking yourself, how on earth is this related to deception effects? Well, the way the model talks about us as epistemic agents, it means that for us, well-being, i.e. functioning well, means that we have a generating model of the world that allows us to predict things, and that's pretty accurately reflecting of reality. So the idea is that the better the model is, the more our predictions can get confirmed, the less error we experience, the more subjective well-being we experience. So the way deception plays into this is when we receive false information, particularly by those individuals that we trust, it actually interferes with this process. And it means we start to lose our grip, and that's a technical term that's used in this scientific literature. We use our grip on reality, and it starts to develop into those mental health problems. This study that I've kind of showed to you guys here, White and Miller, they were looking at how social media can produce mental health deficits via this exact kind of thing. So the idea that social media is presenting inaccurate realities or false realities or deceiving or filtering reality. And they were able to track how this in fact produces mental health problems because our reality keeps mismatching to what we think it should look like. So where I've started my research is more in the social and relation effects. So I have been kind of doing some work in this active inference model, but here's kind of where I've been doing most of my work. And my work is very much based on kind of evolutionary accounts of honesty and dishonesty, and the idea that human communication is infinitely malleable, it's infinitely creative. And yet what's so interesting about it is it's very stable despite our significant incentives to deceive other people. And so it's like, why? The question kind of becomes, why do we tell the truth so much? Evolutionary models basically point to this idea that honesty really evolved for small group collaboration and coordination. So we're honest with each other so that we can share more information, we get a more accurate picture of what we're facing in terms of our collaborative tasks. And we also do things like share information about our own welfare. So this kind of answers the question of, why do we honestly express our emotions to people? Why wouldn't we just feel our emotions and just feel them and have it be done with? Well, the idea is we share this welfare information with others because we're trying to get them to kind of help us and look after us. So by contrast, dishonesty is very much involved in intergroup conflict, when we're trying to fool an enemy or when we're facing some sort of threat. So the idea is that expressing honesty or not deceiving is very much what we'd expect in effective collaborative environments. And so that's kind of where I've been doing my research together with my colleague Kay Yoon. We've been looking at teams research. And there's a couple of studies that I'm just going to present just the findings, the basic findings from them both. The first one is we used a sample of adults who are working in a team environment. So they had to be full-time employees in a working environment. And we looked at things like the team size, how often they meet. We also looked at things like how much positive emotion they experience during their team working, because we thought that would positively influence knowledge sharing. But we were especially interested in this particular variable, authentic affect climate. So the idea that people there feel free to honestly express their emotion. And we found a significant positive prediction effect of authentic affect climate on knowledge sharing. So again, the idea that honesty is designed for collaboration. And then we were able to also replicate this finding in teams research we did with intact teams at the university here. So they work on real life client projects. So this data actually I did analyze in a nested way, but the ICC indicated that that wasn't necessary. So perhaps when we collect more data, I'll be able to kind of use multi-level models to make this, to kind of reveal this relationship, but the same effect happened. Authentic affect climate resulted in increased knowledge sharing, controlling for positive affect. So the idea, it's not just about feeling good, it's about being able to be honest in the team. So my point today was just kind of to share with you some things that I've been working on. I would love to, if you have any data that speaks to this issue, I have been analyzing some secondary data and that's been fun. Or if you just want to chat more about it, or if you have ideas, papers that I should be reading. But really, it was just kind of like to start a conversation with you guys, because as deception researchers, we might be asked to comment on, deception in society and what the effects might be. So we should be prepared to say something. So thank you. I'll stop sharing.